second here. Let's see. Okay, so the session is being recorded, and welcome everyone to day one of our two-day workshop on qualitative research. The response to this workshop has been absolutely overwhelming. We have, as of this morning, 123 participants that have registered for this workshop. And given the large number of participants that we have, it may throw a few challenges insofar as having more intimate conversations within a group of 4 or 5 or 6 people. And so this will become more of an information dissemination workshop as opposed to a highly interactive workshop. And you can certainly understand the reason why when there are that many participants. So this throws a bit of a challenge for us. I will do my best to make sure that that we have some breakout discussion Q&A type segments where we go through some concerns of yours, some queries, etc. And as I wrote on my email, or wrote in my email, please feel free to use the chat box. And somebody use the annotation feature right now. Please refrain from writing on the board. Please take that off right away. I see somebody has scribbled something on the first slide. I would request you to please take it off. Do not use the whiteboard, okay? Until we decide to do that. All right. So, and I will be calling upon my moderator. My moderator for today is a young lady by the name of Ms. Pranati Haldia, who's going to assist me with some related tasks such as keeping an eye on chat messages, muting and unmuting participants, and ensuring that your voices are being heard. Pranati has a master's in social work from TIS, Guwahati, and is currently working as a remote research assistant with Princeton University in the US. So welcome aboard, Pranati. Please feel free to post your messages in the chat box, and we will do our best to address your queries during the 15-minute Q&A session at the end of each day. So we have tried to, because of the volume of information that needs to get shared, we are going to keep the Q&A to the last 15 minutes today and tomorrow. But if there's an impromptu conversation that needs to happen, we will try to do that also, okay? And during the 15-minute session, if there are remaining queries, I can address those queries at the end of the workshops via email with everybody, because there's going to be obviously a lot of information that needs to be gone over. Given the large number of participants, it may not be possible to have very frequent interactive conversations. So please be aware of this, that I typically cover this content in about 3 days, 3 full workshop days on site at a campus. So please, I ask you to lower your expectations just a little bit. I'm not going to be able to do that kind of a justice as I would if I were standing face to face with you or sitting with you face to face. So there are some challenges that we're going to encounter. The best way to learn, in my opinion, the best way to learn qualitative research is to experience it firsthand. What do I mean by that? So while this may appear to be a lecture, okay, don't sit back and not do any reflection. The best way to learn is to take a deep dive into this. And even though you're not able to unmute yourself and say what you have to say because of the large number of participants, make sure you put your message in the chat box, and Pranati will keep an eye out on that and save all the messages for me, and she'll share them with me after the workshop. So you learn qualitative research by doing qualitative research, okay? That's a very important aspect here. You do not learn this by just understanding theories, reading books, and understanding some constructs, etc. You do get some knowledge that way, but really the knowledge comes in qualitative research because it's a very rambling type of research. It's very convoluted, where there are a lot of dots that need to be connected. So, so please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat box, and I'm going to try to make an attempt to address those. And if any of you need my guidance, support, assistance, whatever, on a study that you're doing, if you have a doctoral research that's going on, and if you need my help with some individualized coaching or tutoring, please feel free to contact me directly, and I'll be able to, talk to you about that. I would like all of you to think of it. This is very, very important, this last piece. I would like you all, starting this minute, to think about a research problem or a research predicament that you may like to address through qualitative research. Okay, again, so I would like you all to think about a research problem or a research predicament that you would want to have addressed by qualitative research. Please post it today in the chat box or via email. Keep a note of that. And on day 2, which is tomorrow, we are going to try to address some of those research problems. Obviously, there are a lot of people, and depending upon how many research problems are shared with us, I'm going to try to at least delve into and make a dive into those research problems, okay? To make sure that you get some clarity about what it is that you plan to research. On day 2, we will get into an in-depth discussion, which is tomorrow. We'll get into some sort of an in-depth discussion around the research problems. So with that, now sit back and enjoy the workshop. So with that, I would like to begin. But before I begin, I'd be remiss if I did not thank Dr. Bilimale, who is the chair or the, I guess he's the head of the MPH department at JSS Academy of Higher Education and Research, which I guess is part of the JSS Medical College, a very large institution in Mysore, or Mysuru as it is now called. So I would like to really thank Dr. Bilimale for his incredible support and help with putting together such an exciting workshop. And it is my hope that if some of you find this interesting, then during my upcoming visit to India in February of next year, between February and March, I'll be there for 5 weeks on an academic tour. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you guys on site at JSS or any other institution. So let me just go to the next slide. Just give me 1 second here. So let's read this. Because of the equifinality of writing and doing qualitative research, the lack of a boilerplate need not mean that the kingdom is lost. What is lost in structure is gained in the ability to be creative. So thus one might replace a nail with super glue or other bonding agent. However, what you use, the burden is on you to make sure that the adhesive adheres, i.e. your story coheres and the shoe holds tight. Now, this is by Michael G. Pratt at the Boston College. So what is this author trying to say here? So what this gentleman is trying to say here is that unlike quantitative research, where there is a set procedure, there are set protocols, structure, in qualitative research, you will often find that there's a lack of structure, a lack of preset procedures to do stuff. It's not that there is no process or that there is nothing scientific about it. All of that is true, but quantitative research tends to be more numeric. We are dealing in numbers. That data that you think of in quantitative research is numeric data. On the other hand, the data that you think of in qualitative research is non-numeric. What do we mean by non-numeric? What we mean by non-numeric is that you're dealing with thoughts, feelings, observations, perceptions, biases, narratives of people, their stories. You're listening to their stories. So now consider this for a minute. Again, look at this piece by Dr. Pratt. if you look at this piece, you'll see that because there's a no set procedures, there's no set way of doing stuff in qualitative research. It poses a tremendous amount of challenge because in quantitative, you may send out 100 questionnaires or 200 questionnaires to respondents. And let's say you get about 60% response back. You have a decent number of questionnaires that have come back. But that's all linear, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, or how do you think about this? Name, from A, B, C, D, prioritize or taxonomize. It's not difficult to go through that data. So that data becomes a rich storehouse for you. On the other hand, if you're doing even 20 interviews, and 20 is actually too much, but even if you're doing 15 in-depth interviews, semi-structured in qualitative research, you're going to find you may have 350 pages of transcripts. Wow. How does one look at this voluminous data? Not only just look at it, how do you make sense of this data? How do you tease apart what is happening in this data? What is emerging in this data? When I say emerging, emergent themes, you all have heard of emergent themes, because unless you know what the emergent themes are, you cannot play with this data. You cannot do anything with this data. So can you see the challenge that comes up? So it requires the qualitative researcher to have a great deal of prowess and a great deal of creativity to deal with this massive data set. All right. And even before you get to collect that data, you're going to find it really challenging to do the interviewing, because unlike quantitative, where you're dealing with respondents and you have a hands-off relationship, you're sitting here and you're sending out mailers, you're sending out questionnaires or surveys, and they don't know who you really are other than your profile. But here, you're actually doing an interview, just like I'm sitting here with you virtually. You'll be sitting with somebody virtually or in a physical setting and asking them questions, doing prompts, trying to gather information that is rich and evocative, right? That is pathos laden. Pathos laden meaning it's laden with a lot of emotion, not just surface emotions, laden with a lot of deep, tender emotions, because that's what you're trying to get. That's why it's called qualitative versus quantitative. Okay, so let me go to the next screen. So in qualitative research, you're talking about stories and narratives. So the questions you have to ask yourself are you able to tell a good story? Okay. Are you comfortable with your and others' pathos, which is deep emotion? So if you're the kind of person or researcher who's not comfortable with your own feelings and emotions, you would probably find it a little perplexing to deal with really deep emotions in others, okay, as they share them with you. Are you okay with having voluminous, non-numeric data to research? The lot of the volume of data. Are you okay, or are you going to feel totally overwhelmed with this huge data set? And a lot of people, so you have to be honest with yourself. Not everybody is cut out for qualitative research. It takes a very special research mindset to do qualitative research. Are you comfortable listening to evocative descriptions and discursive accounts? Discursive means rambling, all right? So you're talking to someone, they don't have a script in front of them, even though you have a script. You're asking them questions such as, tell me about a time when you were facing this issue or facing this challenge in your life. Or tell me about a time that you have an altercation with your boss and how did it feel? Or tell me about what it feels like to be part of an LGBTQ community, okay? And tell me something about how you felt about being marginalized by the mainstream. So can you see how tricky this can be? So are you comfortable dealing with those issues, all right? Because if you're not, you're going to find yourself really in a pickle, okay? Are you able to work patiently with the lack of structure and procedures? So if you don't have the capacity, and if you're kind of person who wants everything very structured, very preset with procedures and processes and stuff of that nature, you're going to find yourself frustrated, okay, when you do qualitative research. So keep that in mind. When dealing with qualitative data, the researcher is typically working with the participants' thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So unlike in quantitative research, where you're dealing with numerics, okay, you're dealing with numbers. Here you're dealing with emotions, thoughts, abstract stuff. And sometimes my students will tell me, sir, my dissertation committee chair is telling me, what are you doing with this qualitative research? Where is your data? And she's telling him, sir, but I've collected all of this data, this interview data, I've got the transcripts ready, but where is the data? So they think of data as only numeric. Data is not just numeric, or data are non-numeric. So I made the same mistake that most students make. They refer to data as singular. Data, remember, is always plural. So you look at data, you say data are being collected, not data is being collected. I made the same mistake a million times. So remember, when you're referring to data, you're referring to are. Data are being collected, or data are being examined, or data are being explored. Unlike quantitative studies, the volume of data can be enormous. I just said, data can contain numerous overlapping ideas. You've seen the Mangalore tiles, one overlapping the other, right? You see a tiled roof, okay? There are so many overlapping ideas, concepts, strategies, constructs in qualitative research that one can feel totally confused. We can feel totally befuddled by it. And some of these ideas may be so contradictory, even though they become part of the same research approach, they may be so contradictory. One author is saying something, another author is refuting that, or totally disagreeing with that and coming up with a different strategy. So how do you then make sense of, how do you keep your mind grounded? How do you make sense of such disparate data, such spread out, rambling data and rambling ideas? So the researcher is tasked with making sense of this. You have to be able to make sense of what is being shared with you, okay? And that is one of the biggest challenges you're going to find in qualitative research, all right? So it's not all challenges, by the way. It's a very, very rich way of doing it. In other words, some research problems and some research phenomena lend themselves only to qualitative inquiry and not to quantitative, okay? And I'll get into that as we progress. There is no preset roadmap or boilerplate meaning a preset procedure to do this, okay? So you have to fall back on a lack of structure, okay? You have to be comfortable with not knowing, right? And this comfort with not knowing, while it's okay for some people who can think in the abstract, there are other folks who want a preset procedure that find it very frustrating, okay? And I'm finding that somebody had done some annotation on the screen, which is very annoying. I did not do it. Whoever did it, you know what you did. Please, if you try to make an attempt to remove that, because this is going to show up in all the slides. This is very, very disappointing. Somebody just wrote a scratch there. Okay, don't play around. This is not your plaything, okay? So please make sure that you remove that and do not use the annotation feature, right, in the whiteboard, okay? Thank you so much for your cooperation. So rather than a researcher leading the study, which is often what a positivist scientist might do, qualitative research may call upon you as a researcher to remain open to being led by the emerging data. So now this is a concept that can also be very challenging for people. Unlike in quantitative research, where the researcher has a hands-off relationship with the research. What do I mean by that? The researcher wants to have a pure research, not contaminated by his or her own persona, his or her own profile, his or her own thoughts. They want to have pure meaning, let's collect all the data objectively. There is a tremendous amount of emphasis on objectivity. Okay. By contrast, when you're doing qualitative research, you're looking at subjectivity. And even within subjectivity, you're looking at intersubjectivity. The intersubjectivity meaning, how are you impacting the participant and how's the participant impacting you? We call that the paradoxically bilateral relationship. And I'll get into that as we progress further into the seminar. So this may be a troublesome notion to a researcher who's not comfortable with incertitude, not comfortable with not knowing. So if you're not comfortable with not knowing, you may find yourself in a real quandary because you want certainty, you want outcomes, and there are no such things as outcomes or results. The results that you think of in a qualitative study are actually findings. They are not tangible results, as you would see in quantitative. In quantitative, you start with a hypothesis, and then based on the hypothesis, you apply some theories and either prove or disprove that hypothesis. That's not what we are doing here. So here we may have a research problem or a research predicament, and then we are collecting data on that. We're trying to make sense subjectively on that data. So imagine the researcher being led by the research. Just feel that sometimes in qualitative research, your research data are leading you somewhere, versus in quantitative research where you are leading. All right. So you have to be able to sit back and see what is emerging. By being led, I mean to see what is being emergent in the data and what is the data telling you or not telling you about this. Okay, so I was talking about paradoxically bilateral relationship. Unlike quantitative research, where the researcher assumes a hands-off distant relationship, a qualitative researcher takes an active role in the co-creation of knowledge with study participants. Okay, so what you're doing in qualitative research, and especially in the kind of research that we're going to be talking about, which is phenomenology and grounded theory and all that, I'll get into that in the next segment. The researcher is taking an active role in the co-creation of knowledge. So in quantitative research, the respondents are simply responding to you. The researcher is collecting the data, statistically analyzing the data, making those bar charts, fish diagrams, etc., illustrations to see what emerged from the data. There is no co-creation of knowledge. Researcher is creating all the knowledge in quantitative research. In qualitative research, by contrast, you are co-creating because you are part of the interview process. You're guiding, you have that back and forth relationship. There's an iterative process that goes on. So the qualitative researcher both impacts and is impacted by the participant interview. The researcher's skill lies in maintaining objectivity and allowing participants to freely express themselves while eliciting thick data. What do I mean by thick? You'll hear the expression thick data in qualitative studies. By thick data, we mean data that is voluminous, number one, that is rich, that is evocative, that is laden with stories, imaginary stuff, okay? That is laden, that's very, very rich in nature because you want thick, rich data to be able to analyze it effectively. Researcher does not intrude, direct, or otherwise manipulate participants, only keeps them focused on the study phenomenon. So if you're researching a study phenomenon, I'm going to get to all that. So this is, while I'm reading this in the interest of time, I will be getting to examples in a bit, okay? So the researcher does not intrude. So even though you're having a conversation with participants, you are refraining from guiding, steering them in one direction or the other. You're allowing for the free flow of narratives to emerge. Now, what do I mean by that? Do I mean it's going to be free for all, that they can talk about anything under the sun? No, that's not the idea. Sometimes if they stray, and all people do while they're having a conversation, that can get, their minds can go somewhere else. So you need to be able to tactfully, artfully bring them back to the study. So you might say, oh, but that's an excellent point that you raised. But let me ask you this question. So when you ask the participant a question, you're taking back sort of control on the interview. Because what is your goal as a researcher in qualitative? It is to collect thick, rich, evocative data. Because the richer your data, the better you're going to be able to do the analysis. Now, I'm going to be talking about a thing called facticity, which is sometimes people will say to me, sure, but I was doing the interview and it seemed to me that the participant was lying to me, was embellishing the truth. There is no such thing as facticity, facts. In other words, we are not after facts. You're detectives, but you're not detectives that are going after facts and reporting in journalism. What you're trying to do is, how are they making sense of something that has been perplexing to them? So even if you feel that somebody is not being honest with you, it doesn't matter. That's the way they make sense of the phenomena, and you have to honor that, because what you're not after is facts. You're after stories, narratives, their experiences. Sometimes their experiences may be so full of confusion when they're thinking back to something that happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So if they're narrating that to you, something might appear to be, this doesn't feel right. I think this person is making it up. Doesn't matter. You have to honor whatever data is being shared with you. It's a very important aspect. The researcher does not intrude, direct, or otherwise manipulate. This is an alien and troublesome concept to a lot of quantitative scientists. So when quant scientists look at qual, when I say quantitative scientists look at qualitative, they shy away. They say, this is all abstract. This is all made up. Where is the data? Where are the facts? Where is the validity? Okay. Where is the conformity? Where is the regularity? Where is the positivity here? Because they are thinking with a positivist mindset. Qualitative research is Verstehen, which is a rejection of positivist science. And I'll get into that. So qualitative research involves data that has been collected by a researcher who fully acknowledges that the data may have been impacted by the researcher's own ideas. So when you're doing an interview or conducting an interview with a participant, and incidentally, in qualitative research, we refer to people that we collect data from as participants, not as respondents. You see the difference? Participant means somebody who's participating in. Unlike in quantitative, where they're simply responding, here they are participating. Participating in what? Participating in an interview, participating in making sense, co-creating knowledge with you. So just think of that. The researcher clearly reflects on and delineates the challenges, experiences, assumptions, and predicaments that she may have faced. So I'll talk about the concept of bracketing in qualitative research, which means before you embark on researching a phenomena, you have to, as a researcher, bracket, put aside your own biases, your own assumptions, your own predicaments, challenges, feelings, because let's say you are part of, I'm just giving an example. Let us say you're part of an LGBT community and you have lived through marginalization, right? And you are interviewing somebody, and you're the researcher, and you're interviewing somebody who does not belong to the LGBT community, right? And you're researching a phenomena, whatever phenomena that might, let's say emotional abuse or even marginalization. And somebody who is not part of your life world, i.e., who's not part of your LGBT community, does not understand your unique challenges. So he or she might say something to you, and you might say to yourself, that is not how I've experienced marginalization. People have, looked at me differently. Sometimes people have looked down on me because I'm gay, or I'm a lesbian, or I'm a queer, or whatever. So if you have to do a subjective interview with some objectivity, you have to have the capacity as a researcher to be able to set aside or bracket. We call that the epoche or epoch, EPOCHE. So you have to be able to set that aside for the purpose of the researcher, for the purpose of the research, because you know that despite your best efforts, you are still a human being, and that some of your subjectivity is going to leak into the interview. But the skill lies in having that separation for the purpose of the research, for the purpose of collecting good data. These interferences, we call them interferences, your biases, thoughts, assumptions, emotions, whatever, are on something. They're also considered data. Here's the beautiful part, that whatever you are bracketing is also going to be data for the research, but it has to be dealt with in a different sense, in a different way. So that they do not impede on a researcher's account. So while you're bracketing, keeping them aside, your hope is that your own perceptions, ideas, thoughts, feelings, emotions may not get into or may not impinge on the research. Reflexivity involves a subjective process of self-consciousness. So we call that section in a qualitative study reflexivity. Reflexivity you're not going to find in a quantitative study. So what is reflexivity? The reflexivity is a segment of your research where the researcher discloses his or her own bracketing, biases, ideas, thoughts, assumptions, and says, I'm keeping them aside for the purpose of the research. And at the end, once the research is conducted, when you're writing the report, at that point in time, the reflexivity section really becomes alive. Because here now you're saying in your study, what was it like to bracket that? What was it like to keep these assumptions apart? And what you assumed, is that the way it came out? Right? After you completed the study, was that accurate? Were your assumptions accurate, or were your assumptions totally way off base? So you get into a little discussion around that. So unwittingly or wittingly, whatever has happened to you as a researcher while conducting research has to be also reported as part of a qualitative study. So just remember that. When is qualitative research appropriate? And by the way, I started with this basic segment or basic PowerPoint because most of you, or many of you at least, in your expectations, when you filled the form, you wanted a very basic understanding, starting from a very basic understanding and building it up. So I'm trying to do a building block approach, right? Where I'm giving you very basic. So for some of you might just be falling asleep thinking, oh my goodness, I already know this stuff. Well, guess what? I have news for you. Even though you might know this stuff, you may not totally be with it, okay, when it comes to actually doing research. Or you may not understand some concept clearly. So when is qualitative research appropriate? What kind of research questions does it answer? What kind of data does it produce? How do we interpret such data? So question number one is, when is it appropriate to do qualitative research? What kind of questions does it answer? What kind of data does it produce, and how do we interpret such data? So let's take a dive into this. So qualitative research is a scientific method of observation to gather non-numeric. Folks, keep an eye out on this. Non-numeric means this is not numbers. It is all thoughts, feelings, emotions, perceptions, attitudes. This type of research refers to the meanings, concepts, definitions, characteristics, metaphors, symbols, and description of things rather than their counts or measures. So we are not looking at how many eggs do you have in this basket, okay? Or how many elephants were in the parade, right? So you're not looking at numbers. Or how many ideas did you come up with? It deals with your thoughts. It deals with your thoughts on the elephants. What do you make sense of 10 eggs in a basket? That is the kind of question that you might come up. I'm making a silly research question. Most of you are not going to try to understand what does it mean to have 10 eggs in a basket. But I'm giving you an example. So versus thinking about how many eggs do you have in the basket? Okay, closed-ended question, I have 10 eggs. You ask an open-ended question in qualitative. How do you make sense of carrying 10 eggs in the basket? Or how did you make sense of 10 elephants or 9 elephants walking together in the procession after they bathe in the lake? You see where I'm going with this? I'm trying to elicit responses which are open-ended, abstract, right? Where I can deal with your emotions, I can deal with your feelings. When I say deal with, I can collect that data and make sense of the data with you as a co-participant. So qualitative research methods, when applied to social sciences, best study the why and how of human experience as opposed to when, where, or what. So you're dealing in qualitative researches. Why did this thing happen? Or how did this thing happen? Or what is it like for you to make sense of chronic lower back pain? Or what is it like for you to make sense of being a single mother or a single parent raising a child in a household? So you're a single parent raising a child. What are some of the challenges that you face raising a child? So keep that in mind. There are a variety of qualitative research methods and designs available. You've got action research. We'll be talking about participatory action research tomorrow. I'm going to be talking about phenomenology, grounded theory. I'm going to show you IP and interpretative phenomenological approach, because one of the things that many of you asked was I want to understand a process of not only collecting data, but how do I make sense of data? How do I actually come up with themes in the data? Is there an approach that I can use? Is there a turnkey process that I can deploy? So I'm going to discuss that later today. Depending upon the way a question is framed, we could be looking at different qualitative research methods. Now, I'm going to ask you to focus very hard on the next slide. Now, even though this may appear to be a very populated slide, okay, I want you to pay some attention to that, okay? All right. So here's where we are going. So example, RQ. RQ means research question. Number 2 column is key features. Number 3 is the suitable approach that you might deploy to answer that research question. So let's say the first research question is, what are the main experiential features of being abused? Many of you, as a matter of fact, I think majority of you are here from the health, for the medical field. Many of you have your MDs, your MBBS. Many students are from doing their public health studies. A number of you are from other allied fields, also medical. So I'm delighted to have you here, and hopefully you'll be able to come up with some questions that tomorrow that we can tackle. So what are the main experiential features of being abused? Now, if you look at this, it's an indirect question. If I ask any of you to help me understand what is the meaning of abuse, whether you have actually experienced abuse in your life or not, you can still say something about abuse because you read about it in the newspapers, you look at it on social media, you hear stories, you read books about abuse. So in the key features column, and I'm going to move my cursor here so you can see it, note the emphasis on the common structure of abuse, albeit indirectly experienced by a participant. What do we mean by that? The common structure of abuse. So we are looking at abuse as a phenomena. So the phenomena is abuse, okay? But we are looking at abuse indirectly because I'm asking you to narrate to me experiences of abuse, your indirect experiences, your thoughts, perception, ideas about abuse. I'm not asking you, how was it for you to be abused in a marriage? Or how was it you to feel abused in the workplace? So if you look at this question, the suitable approach might be phenomenology, right? We may deploy phenomenology to answer this research question because phenomenology, as I will get into a little later, phenomenology deals with the essence of a phenomena. It is you're trying to understand what it is like to experience a phenomena, because phenomenology is all about experience, experience, experience. It's a very nimble and yet very convoluted approach. It's more of a philosophy than a methodology in qualitative research. So this is an example of thatness. What was it like for you to that? So when we talk about that, we are asking you to reflect on that phenomena of abuse. So it is not, I'm asking you to please tell me what was it like for you to be abused. I'm not asking that. I'm not researching that. I'm researching what is your perception of abuse, which may be happening to yourself or to others. Now, let's toss that question around and ask that question differently. How does someone who has lived with abuse, and this is my, by the way, look at the second question. How does someone who has lived with abuse make sense of it? Okay. So now here we are looking at the direct lived experience. Remember here in the first column up to here, it was indirect. Here it is direct experience, direct lived experience. And I'm going to get into the meaning of lived experience. Lived experience has a different connotation, different meaning from common everyday lived experience. Okay. As narrated by the participant, meaning making and sense making are pivotal. So when you're asking this form of question, you want an approach that dives into the direct lived experience. And the research question may be best answered using the interpretative phenomenological approach that I'm going to get into in a little bit later. So the IPA, we call that IPA, interpretative or interpretive, one and the same thing, right? And I know that I've got some students here that are currently deploying IPA that I'm coaching. They're going to be deploying IPA to study some amazing phenomena. One of my students here from UK, who's also here, is researching the phenomena of breastfeeding, right? Versus formula. What is it like for mothers to breastfeed, and what are some of the challenges that they encounter, etc. So very, very interesting idea. So IPA is and I'll make a quick few-minute pitch on this. IPA is an approach that was developed in the UK by health psychologist Jonathan Larkins and Flowers, okay? And it is an approach that initially was used for health sciences, for public health, for the medical field. For instance, initially, when IPA came about, this would answer questions like, what is it like to experience chronic lower back pain? Or what is it like to hear for the very first time that you have been detected as HIV positive? Or what is it like to experience dialysis? Okay, so there was a very rich, very deep, very tender way, because when you're looking at this type of phenomena, you want an approach that honors their emotions, sentiments, feelings, ideas. So we'll get into that more. So if you look at the third box here, what factors influence how people manage abuse? What factors? So remember, in this first two, we are not looking at factors. The first one was indirect, sorry. The second was direct, meaning making, sense making. The third is what factors influence how people manage abuse. Factors. Note the emphasis on explanation and causality. Factors, impacts, influences, etc. One thing influences another, one thing impacts another. These factors lead to this. Remember one thing, in qualitative research, you can have both causality and non-causality. In the first two scenarios here, we are not, and I repeat, we are not exploring causality. We are simply exploring the lived experience or the indirect experience of something. We're not asking them, why do you think this happens to you? No, that's not what we are doing. So in the third scenarios, when we look at factors, impacts, influences, we are going to be deploying what is known as grounded theory. And grounded theory may be successfully deployed to answer such a research, because grounded theory is about constructing a new theory or evaluating or assessing an existing theory. So what factors were responsible for, for instance, a question that grounded theory may ask is, there are a lot of international students that head for destinations overseas. Okay, I know my student Komal, who's here, ended up in Melbourne, and she's doing a master's in education there. Some other students of mine are doing other stuff in the UK, and some are doing in the States. So if your question is, what factors lead to the success or acclimation or adjustment when they arrive in a new country, in a new environment, in a new culture, and they're investing their money, they're investing funds into tuition. What are some of the factors that make them, that influence their adjustment in the first 1 year or first 6 months? So when we are looking at factors and influences, we are trying to look at grounded theory. Now the same question can be answered by other qualitative methods too, but the appropriate method is grounded theory, and I'll be discussing grounded theory later. So vagaries of qualitative research. So what are some of the peculiarities? You will observe that even though the phenomena of abuse remains the same in all the research questions, remember, I'll go back. If you notice, abuse is the phenomena we are researching. Again, abuse is the phenomena we are researching in this question. Again, abuse is the phenomena. You see, the phenomena that we are researching, friends, is abuse. But how we are going about it is different, and what approach we are using is different. And how is it different? Because that approach is led by the research question. Always remember, if you don't remember anything else, just remember, it is not appropriate to fall in love with a methodology or an approach and then go looking for a research question. It is important to have a topic in your mind when you're building a study. Set up a nice research question, a honest, authentic research question, and then that research question will guide you on what kind of strategy or what kind of approach or what kind of methodology you're going to be using. Okay, so I just wanted to make this point here. The phenomena remains the same, but if you have a different research question, it leads you to a different approach. The first was phenomenology, second was IPA, third is grounded theory. You see that? Everybody see that difference? Okay. You will observe that even though the phenomena of abuse remain the same, each question points the research in a different question. Each outcome may also be different depending on what the research study is seeking to accomplish. Unlike quantitative research, where the data collected is numeric and highly objective, the data collected and analyzed in qualitative research is highly subjective. Some of the same things that I'm repeating right now that I've talked about. It is certainly not for someone who's unable to tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity. So if you are not comfortable with an uncertain and ambiguous mindset, you would probably best to shy away from qualitative research, because you're going to find yourself totally overwhelmed with this. A skillful qualitative researcher does not begin the study with the final outcome in mind. Very, very, very important. In quantitative research, you have an outcome in mind. What is the outcome? So I have hypothesis number one, I have hypothesis number two, and I'm going to use this grand theory, whatever that theory might be, to prove or disprove the hypothesis by collecting numeric data. So you're already starting with some notion of finality. In qualitative research, you remain speculative and tentative. You're open to emergence. You're open to surprises, because guess what? You're going to find a lot of surprises, a lot of convoluted ideas and dots that you have to somehow connect. So you're also willing to change course midway through the research. In quantitative, it's very difficult to change course because you have collected the data. Now that's all you have. Whereas in qualitative, you can read, interpret, make sense of data many different ways. And so you could go in many different directions and really abstract and go abstract and imagine some of the stuff so that is a huge difference between qualitative and quantitative studies. Final thoughts, I would like to conclude here by saying that there's a great deal of variety and range of approaches within the realm of qualitative research, such as phenomenology, grounded theory, case study method, ethnography, ethnomethodology, action research. We're going to be doing a form of action research tomorrow. I'll share with you. It's called participatory action research. The researchers advise to use caution before embarking on a specific methodology. It is very, very important that, and in going back to the very first quote I showed you by Dr. Michael Pratt, even though there's no preset structure, there are no procedures, there's no the processes, it's incumbent upon you all the more to be true to yourself, to have a robust inquiry, to specifically think about what it is that you're researching and whether a qualitative approach is good, and if the qualitative approach is the right approach, what approach or strategy or methodology are you going to be deploying within the realm of qualitative research. So do not fall in love with the methodology first and then go looking for a research. It's kind of like putting the cart before the horse. A lot of my students say, sir, I attended your workshop in phenomenology. Sir, I'm going to be doing phenomenology only. Why? What made you think about phenomena? Just because it's attractive, just because it's novel? No, that's not the idea. Look for a research question first. But before you look for a research question, you look for a phenomena. What is your problem statement? And we'll discuss all that later. Spend a great deal of time thinking about the research question. Think about the research. When I was doing my PhD, it took me almost, I'm going to say at least 7 to 8 months of solid looking through literature, going, reflecting, attending seminars to come up with a research question. And I came up with a very novel research question called negative capability, which is the capacity of someone to stay in mysteries, doubts, and uncertainties without irritably reaching after fact and reason. So negative capability was used only once by the famous English romantic poet John Keats to his brothers, in which he mentioned, and he was talking about the Shakespearean ability to be in that capacity of knowing and not knowing, of being in that liminal space, straddling the uncertainty and the certainty. So point I'm trying to make is that whatever question you have, it should be a question that is burning in your mind, that you're curious about. Not because it feels good or because everybody else is doing it, you jump on the bandwagon. It should be a very unique question, very unique to you. It's keeping you up at night. It's what are you after within that research question? What are you trying to explore? Is it even explorable? For instance, if you just want to see, I want to see how many clouds are in the sky today. Is that something that you can explore right now? Probably not. So there's to be feasibility, a viability, objectivity about what it is that you're trying to explore. Is there research literature? If there's no direct research literature available, then can you probably go sideways and have affiliated conversations that are happening around your research topic? So narrow it down to one or more, 2 sentences at the most. Make sure that your question is researchable and contains the phenomena you wish to study, along with the context if applicable. Resist the temptation to rush to an outcome before it is even achieved. Certain approaches, such as phenomenology, do not seek an outcome. You may only have certain findings to report. Okay, and that is the end of this one. Okay, so before I go into the next one, and I'm going to pull it up anyway, which is no, actually, before I go that, I have to go into, just give me 1 second here. Pulled up the wrong one. Okay, all right. So before I embark into this next one, because there's a lot of information to cover, and I'm just being mindful of the time. Any quick thoughts, because we've been together for an hour, and I just want to decompress the mind a little bit. And any quick questions, thoughts, observations, comments on that previous segment that we covered? Because it was a basic segment, but for some people, even that basic stuff eludes them because they are confused about how or when to go into qualitative research, etc. So would anybody, just a couple of people, if you can share before I start this? Pranati, if you can see what's in the chat box. Yeah, can you guide
Yes,
me here?
there is a lot. Absolutely. So, Dr. Behel, we have a lot of questions actually so far. I'm not sure if these are any quick sort of questions that we can address at the moment, but they range from talking about ethical implications of qualitative research to all the way till what you talked about, which is
Yeah.
hypothesis and how that's related to quantitative research versus say
Yes.
how does it occur in qualitative when a funder is paying you for something specific,
Okay,
right?
so let me first attempt. So just hold your thought for a second. Let me first attempt.
Absolutely.
This is a very important question about ethics. Ethics and compliance are very, very critical. So in the US, where I'm located, we have an institutional review board. Anytime you're experiencing or anytime you're researching human subjects such as participants, you are required to provide them with an informed consent form, which outlines what you're researching, how you're going to be doing about safeguarding the information, use of pseudonyms so we don't disclose their names, etc., etc. They have to sign off on that. And I have to actually, in the US, I have to have an 8-hour self-study before I can, so I have to take an exam, like a self-exam, before IRB will even let me go further with the application. So I submit the application, my institution representative, IRB representative will take the application to IRB, to the board, they present it, they sign off on it, approve, only then can I collect data. So was that the question? What are the ethical considerations of this?
I think, yes, it does talk about considerations, but also implications when we write qual research proposals specifically. And they've grounded this question by giving some context. We anticipate one thing when we write, but we land up with something totally new. Should we keep applying again to the ethical committee?
No. You apply only once to the ethical committee. Okay. Very excellent question. I love that question because that question has never come before me. Amazing. And I've been doing this work for 20 years. So the question was, if you set out, you get an ethical approval from the committee, or some institutes have their own committees, own boards that sign off. Some have to go through. I think India is leaning more toward now an institutional board, where all of the applications will go. We have not gotten there yet. So now, if you have already received an approval for your research study based on, you give them the synopsis, you give them, this is what I'm doing, how many participants, how will you recruit the participants, what you're going to do, how you're going to protect the information, and they sign off on that. Then if something comes out that is different, that is an emergent part of the, who again did this, please don't use annotation. I repeat, do not use annotation. Stay away from that pen. I know you love to have some fun with it. You can have some fun with it after the web. Don't use annotation. Thanks, because it's very distracting. So again, so you apply, you get the approval, something else comes. That's great, more power to you, because now you have a richer study. So you don't then go back to the committee and say something else emerged. That is the very nature of the elephant. That is the very nature of the process, because something brand new is going to, if everything I knew what is going to emerge, I would not be doing qualitative study. I do qualitative because I want novel, something new, something exciting to emerge. What's the next question?
Could you give me an estimate on how much time we should be spending? I'll pick and choose and just rush through them quickly,
just
or
rush
like combine a couple.
pick and choose the ones that are most important, and then we'll go in the end, the 10,
exactly.
15-minute Q&A.
Sure.
Yeah. I didn't want the segment to go through and just jump into the next one before doing a segue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's take two quick questions, but before that, there's a request that has been made. For question and answers, is it possible to map some specific methods with purpose for study? And they've given an example. For descriptive or analytical, one can say phenomenology, grounded theory, respectively, are used. Are there more? So in the question and answers section,
okay, so we are going to give, just given the time element, I'm going to be only focusing on phenomenology, which is descriptive phenomenology, which is hermeneutic phenomenology, and grounded theory. Within grounded theory, we're going to go with not with the formal grounded theory, but with the more constructive, which is the work of Kathy Sharma's. Okay. Social constructivist approach, where grounded theory being constructed up to social interactions. So we will get into that. Okay. But in the interest of time, I cannot go into a variety of different things. Okay. Because I'm keeping I have a watch in front of me, and I'm notorious for going all over the place. And because participants say, oh my goodness, sir, but it's already 2 hours. I get carried away. So I have to keep track of myself.
Absolutely. But Doctor, before you move forward, just a side note for participants, if you're putting in a question, kindly put in your email ID as well. So in case we can't address it right now, I'm happy to compile it and we can get back to you accordingly tomorrow. I'm noting your names, but it's always good to have your email ID as well. Thank you.
Because remember that you may have a first name and we don't know who you really are.
Exactly.
Okay, because if you put your email ID, that would be now as a matter of fact, that's an excellent point you raised. When you're having a question that you want addressed, please share your email ID with us.
Yeah.
Okay. So that, because what I don't want to do is send out a generic to 126 people. Okay. Maybe we can address that question directly with you.
Absolutely. Dr. Behel, you can move on right after this. I have sent you a couple of notes on chat about how we can stop participants from annotating. And we had a couple of kind participants also email that link to me, or like send it across on chat to suggest how to stop others from writing on screen. So there are
maybe it is a setting I can do on my Zoom that does not allow for annotation, right?
It is very quick. You can do it right now. On top where you see the remote control.
Right. Let's see. Okay, annotate. Oh, annotate? No, this is slide control, remote control. Okay.
Yes. Now on its right hand side, you'll see 3 dots.
Yes, I see 3 dots. Yes.
Yes. Just go click on the 3 dots, and the third option.
Oh, disable annotation. Disable annotation. Okay, I've disabled it.
From participants.
Okay, I've disabled it. Thank you. Thank you. See, that's why it's important to have a moderator to keep me honest.
I'd actually texted you this long back, but thank you to the participants.
I have not looked at the chat box. Believe me, I've been so immersed in this. All right, well, thank you so much. So with that, let me get into, now we are going to be talking. So
Absolutely.
first I segment, thank you, Pranati. So the first segment that we covered was just a generic overview of qualitative research. Now, obviously, it answered some questions, but I'm sure it's raised 1,000 other questions in your mind. Okay. And in what just Pranati was just talking about, our focus today in the two qualitative approaches that we are going to be talking about to just for today is phenomenology and grounded theory. Then tomorrow we'll get into the third method, which is our action research and participatory action research. Okay, so at that point in time, we'll get into a third method. Now, during that course, I'll talk about some other methods, but there are like 15 different qualitative research, or maybe even 20 now, research methods, methodologies, and approaches. It's not possible for me to discuss each and every one, given the time element. We only have 2 hours together, so I have to be very mindful that I'm giving you enough content, all right, so that at least it whets your appetite and we can get some juices flowing and have some really solid questions and answers at the end. So let me start. So this is a qualitative on phenomenology and grounded theory. Now, I'm going to skip over this. There are 126 people because we start with your name, what drew you to this workshop, define this, define that. We will not even end in 2 hours more. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this slide. What is a stream of consciousness? What does doing phenomenology mean to a researcher? Is phenomenology an intellectual exercise? So one of the things that you're going to wonder about phenomenology, which is very different. It's called a stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness simply means what is it? What are ideas, thoughts, feelings, emotions, etc., that are coming to you about a certain phenomenon? Right? You don't even start to make sense of that. It is just buzzwords, things that are coming to you, just flowing to you. Right? What does doing phenomenology mean to a researcher? So when you do phenomenology, what does it mean doing phenomenology to a researcher? Is phenomenology an intellectual exercise or an emotional endeavor? This is a question that often comes up. Let me go to the next one. So phenomenology is a natural science approach, would be steeped in academic psychology, which attempts to, a natural science approach would be steeped in academic psychology, which attempts to predict and control behavior in a laboratory setting. So experience is typically played down. Now, most of you here, or at least a majority of you here, are from medical fields, okay? My own daughter is a physician at UCLA. She's an oncologist and a triple board certified physician. So I know how she thinks. Okay, a lot of you are into the natural sciences, the anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, psychology, whatever, right? Whereas phenomenology and qualitative research falls within the purview of a human science approach, which is not natural science, it's human science. And in human science, you do not control behavior. You do not predict, like, as doctors, many of you are doctors, physicians, you diagnose patients, right? You use your own expertise and your own experience to diagnose, okay? You don't get into a long drawn out conversation with patients. Your patients come to you to feel better, right? Right. So you are using a prescriptive approach, right? Once you diagnose, you do the test, you can make a diagnosis, and you're using a prescription, you're giving them a prescription or a script, as we call it, to go ahead, get this medication, and then you're going to feel well. If you don't feel well, you can certainly know how to contact my office, right? In a human science approach, you're investigating psychological phenomena, but by studying consciousness as it is experienced in oneself and someone else. Now, I see the difference between how a physician approaches or a traditional psychologist approaches behavior and how we look at behavior in a human science approach. Phenomenology, grounded theory, all of these are human sciences approach. We're dealing with the human sciences, okay? So phenomenology is a departure from behaviorism, cognitivism, and positivism. Positivism is within the purview of quantitative studies, okay? Or quantitative studies are within the purview of positivism. Is positivist approach, a return to the things themselves as experience. So in phenomenology, we are dealing with experience, experience, experience. There's nothing more fundamental than experience. So experience isn't simply a response to the interacting variables. So we're not asking you, tell me how are you feeling right now, hot or cold in the environment that you're in the climate, what kind of climate are you doing? Can you define this? Can you describe this? That's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the experience they're having in that life world. What do I mean by that? So I once again shift to the LGBTQ community because there's a lot of new research that is now occurring in India and overseas on the LGBT community. So they are inhabiting a life world. What is that life world? Life world is a community of like-minded people who are experiencing some of the same issues. For instance, LGBTQ folks are part of an LGBTQ community. They have their own clubs that they go to. They have their own, groups, committees, etc. So that becomes their life world. So even if they don't join a particular group, they're part of a community in the mind. So the life world is the world that you create in your mind around the person that you are, around your approach to life, your life experiences, your world views, right? And your sexual preferences, right? It's an embodied relatedness to one's personal world of experience. Embodied means in the body. So in phenomenology, not only do we have a disembodied relationship, which means without a body, but also a bodied relationship, which means somatic, right? So we ask people, how do you feel about something? What is the world of experience like? And we try to figure out what is their lived experience. You'll hear the expression lived experience a lot in phenomenology, okay? So anyone can achieve their fullest potential. This is just by Martin Heidegger. So I'm going to skip over this slide because otherwise it'd take a lot of time for us to do. Prominent psychologists or prominent phenomenologists are transcendental phenomenology. So the two different phenomenological approaches that I'm going to be discussing are transcendental, which is pure. By the father of phenomenology was Edmund Husserl. He was a German scientist and philosopher who came up with the descriptive philosophy of pure essence. Means he was the gentleman who conceptualized the whole idea about phenomenology. And he called it the transcendental or pure or out there into the world, more spiritual, more idealistic form of phenomenology. It's called the descriptive approach. His disciple was Martin Heidegger. Okay. And Martin Heidegger took that descriptive phenomenology to see that it was lacking in some important characteristics. And what were those characteristics? He did not believe that you can experience a phenomena only in its purest, most idealistic form. What about the phenomena that is being lived by you as someone who's part of that life world? So he came up with ontological phenomenology, and ontology is the nature of being. It's the philosophy of being. What is it like to be? Remember in that slide in the last segment, I was talking about what is it like to be abused in marriage? Or what is it like to be abused in the workplace? So when I'm asking somebody, what is it like for you to be abused? I'm asking the person to reflect on the phenomenon of abuse as it is occurring, as it is experienced by that person herself. I'm not asking for a generic experience. So consider the directness. The indirect approach is more of transcendental descriptive phenomenology. The ontological approach is more hermeneutic, making sense of, interpreting. So in descriptive, if you're doing a descriptive phenomenological approach, you're just collecting rich narratives, evocative descriptions of the phenomena as experienced by participants, whatever that phenomena might be. But you as a researcher are making very little of your own interpretations. You allow the reader to make interpretations. You allow the reader to make sense of what has happened. Whereas in ontological phenomenology, you as the researcher are collecting the data and also co-creating the knowledge. So in ontological phenomenology, you as the researcher are also making sense of the participant who's making sense of the phenomenon. So we call this the double hermeneutic. What is the double hermeneutic? I know it's a mouthful, but let me explain. So you are the researcher, right? And if I say to you, I'm the researcher and you are my participant, and I'm saying, and this is the phenomenon, my little box here is phenomena, and I say, can you reflect on your experiences of this phenomenon? Can you make sense of what this phenomenon means to you, or what this idea or concept means to you? And you're reflecting on this. So you're reflecting on this and narrating to me how you make sense of this being the research phenomena or the question, research question. Whereas when I am making sense of what you're making sense, there are two lenses at play. One lens is the lens through which the participant is looking at the phenomena, is viewing the phenomena. And that's the participant's lens. But the researcher's lens is, I'm looking at the participant through my lens, who's making sense of a phenomena. So the phenomena is there and it's being made sense of through two layers. And that's why we call this the double hermeneutic. And that's why this process is so rich and evocative. Because there is no one size fits all. There is not one way of looking at this. There can be a variety of ways of looking at the same phenomena. So if I ask 10 different people to reflect on a phenomena, they will have 10 different answers. So it's a question of not, is this guy or gal telling me the correct answer and this one's not? No, that's not what we are after. We are after, how do different people make sense of phenomena? What is it like for them to experience something? So the double hermeneutic comes into play. Now, just to muddy the waters a little bit more, once you've done your study, right, and your study is ready, so people are now reading your study that you conducted, your research that you conducted. So now the reader is the third party here. So then the reader, it could be your chair of your committee, it could be somebody else that's just looking at your academic, or a researcher who's looking at your phenomena or looking at your study. The reader is now making sense of the researcher who's making sense of the participant who's making sense of the phenomena. As if the world was not complicated enough. Here he comes, throws in another monkey wrench into it. So now you see how complex phenomenology is. And all of you are going to be doing the studies, and your studies are going to be read, and through a process of iteration, you go through a committee, and the committee will say, hey, do this, do that, or make these changes, and this is not sounding right, whatever the case may be. So there are lenses, 3 different lenses through which your study is going to be looked at. But at the very basic level, at least it's going to be 2 lenses. Until you're doing the study, the reader's not there. When I say the reader, an outside reader, not one of your committee. So see the complexity of phenomenology as a research endeavor, how eclectic, how creative you really have to be to be able to make sense of this disparate data, right? Then, of course, there's existential phenomenology, Jean-Paul Sartre, uh, also Simone de Beauvoir, right, who was a companion of Jean-Paul Sartre. They never married. They were in a relationship throughout their lives and had a phenomenal body of work that they did. Okay. Hermeneutic phenomenology, Hans Gadamer. I'm just talking about the different forms of phenomenology, different streams of phenomenology. Critical phenomenology, Paul Ricoeur. Sociological phenomenology, Alfred Schutz, an American sociologist. Deconstruction phenomenology, Jacques Derrida. I think Jacques Derrida was probably a French, if I'm not mistaken. Embodiment phenomenology against Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Descriptive phenomenology, Amedeo Giorgi, and the list goes on. There are like 33 or 35 different streams of phenomenology. What do I mean? So when I remember, I was saying that the qualitative research can be looked at so many different ways by so many different people. There is not one size fits all, right? They can have different perspectives, different approaches, and if you get totally bogged down with that, you're never going to be able to do phenomenology. You have to be able to see and follow. So my advice, suggestion to you would be to take one or two phenomenologists and benchmark their work. Okay, now you can, in your references, if your project is or your study is going in a different direction, you can certainly cite the work of Jacques Derrida, Merleau-Ponty. All of these are really important phenomenologists, but we will focus now on hermeneutic phenomenology. Folks, what does hermeneutic phenomenology mean? Hermeneutic means making sense of, interpreting texts, interpreting meaning. So remember, in descriptive phenomenology, I was talking about only you, the researcher, are collecting data and are reporting the data. And you're talking about themes that are coming in whose data? You're talking about themes that are emerging in the participants' data. But you are not making an interpretive spin on that. So you are not telling them, hey, so such and such person said such and such, and this is how I interpret what they said. That's not your goal in descriptive. You simply report that and you get the emergent themes and you make others make sense of that. Now, that is one approach, and some people subscribe to that approach because they think that interpretation can soil that, can dirty the waters. On the other hand, how can you not interpret something? You're the ones so deeply entrenched in this research. How can you not make sense of this? And I would not like somebody to just do a descriptive, because I want to know, if you're my scholar, you're my student, how the heck do you make sense of this? What meaning structures are you drawing from this? What is the ethos, the structures, essential attributes of the phenomena that you gather? What does it mean to you? You're doing qualitative, then you don't do qualitative, you can just do quantitative and just collect all the descriptive data in graphs, charts, figures, and then report that data. But you're doing qualitative, so I want to know what happened to you. What did you experience? Okay, just a philosophical difference, philosophical approach. It's not one, I'm not saying one is right and the other is wrong. I'm just saying what your preference is. So phenomenology insists that daffodils are indeed different for a wandering poet than they are for a hard-pressed horticulturalist. So if you're a horticulturalist and you're walking through a nursery, you attend to nursery, you attend to flowers all day long, you're looking past the roses. That's another rose. Okay, so the rose is so brilliant, so beautiful, so crimson, almost out there kissing the world. And it doesn't make any sense to you because you work with roses and flowers all day long. You just want to see the plant is healthy, green. But a poet who's walking through that, or a romantic who's walking through that, looks at it differently. all sorts of emotions and feelings and thoughts come into you. You start to form some poetry in your mind, start to make some connections. When was the last time I saw this rose? Wow, what does that rose remind me of? This rose reminds me of the Rose that I knew 10 years ago, a beautiful lady by the name of Rose, right? I'm just giving you a crazy example. So a wandering poet who's going through is looking at this differently than somebody who works with it day in and day out. So for the wandering poet, so who are you as a phenomenologist? Consider yourself like a wandering poet. Because phenomenology, friends, is a poetizing project. If you cannot generate those emotions, feelings in your heart, if you're not comfortable with that, then you're going to have a problem. And the individual is a conscious agent whose experience must be studied from the first person perspective. One of the reasons a lot of students, new students, stumble in this, and I'll tell you, part of the blame rests on the committee. The committee says, what is this you're writing in your study in chapter 1? I did this and I felt this and I recruited 10 participants. Why not? The researcher did this and researcher did that. And the research, I'd be so bored, I would not want to read a word further. I want to see what it is that Komal, who was doing the study, or what is it that Pranati, who was doing the study, what did she experience? I wanted to hear it in her words. I want to hear in Katie's words. I want to hear in somebody else's words what happened to you as you were experiencing it. Right? So please be comfortable with the notion that in your qualitative studies, you're going to have the first person account. I did this versus that was done by the researcher or the researcher undertook the study. That's okay. Now, some of the chapters, like chapter 2, literature review, other chapters, you can go into certainly a third person perspective because that was written by somebody else. Those folks were different, right? But when you're writing about recruiting, writing about analyzing what it meant to you, reflexivity, you use the word I, not the researcher felt. Researcher made 10 assumptions, and while doing the study, the researcher found, no. Please be comfortable with first person perspective, not totally, but sparingly, because it adds richness, it adds evidentiary support to your study. Personal lived experience is therefore perspectival and idiographic. So we are going to look into that. So your personal lived experience, you're researching someone's personal lived experience, not lived experience generically, not indirect lived experience, but your personal lived experience of something, whatever that something might be, a medical issue or psychological issue or whatever concept you're working on. And you could be working on like 1,000 different research concepts. So it's perspectival, means everyone's perspective is different on that phenomenon. If I research 20 different people are going to come up with 20 different things. So then you might say, okay, so how do I make sense of this? Well, that's where your task lies. You have a simple, not a simple, but a elegant research questions schedule or an interview schedule, and you follow those questions, and then you see what's coming up in that. So that's the conformity that you use. You use the exact same questions that you're going to ask, but they can be in a different order. You don't have to ask the first question first and last question last. It can be depending upon the flow of conversation. That's where your creativity comes in. That's where how you make someone comfortable so they'll talk to you, they'll open up to you, correct? So it's perspectival and idiographic. When you're doing phenomenology, and especially IPA, every person's account, every person's interview is treated with the same respect that it deserves without looking at the whole corpus data. So you are looking at each person's account on their own terms with the respect that it deserves. So when you're interviewing a participant, you're not thinking about 10 different participants. You're not thinking about, oh gosh, when is this interview going to end and I'm going to go to the next one, right? You have to give them their due. You have to give them the credit. Because they are spending time with you discussing a very, very difficult situation, sometimes difficult, sometimes perplexing, sometimes really emotionally trying, whatever the case may be. So it's not nomothetic, absolute or generic. So it's per se, it's as such. What did you experience as such, not experience generically, okay? So consciousness is not just limited to awareness, but also pre-conscious and unconscious. I'm going to skip over that. Phenomenology aims to capture as closely as possible the way something is experienced in the context of that experience, folks. So now, what is it like? So the question is, what is it like for an engaged employee to be working in a predominantly virtual organization? So if this were the question, and I'm researching employee engagement, right? But I'm asking the question, what is it like for an engaged employee to be working in a predominantly virtual organization? A lot of work, after the pandemic, a lot of organizations went virtual. Some of them said, do we need to spend all these millions of dollars, millions of pounds on huge offices? We don't need all of this stuff, right? When people can work from home, right? We have the internet. Now, right now, we are connecting with 100, I don't know how many, 115 participants from all around the world. I mean, so why do we need to have an office for 115 people to come to? When this is so much cheaper to do, right? So they could be, so phenomenology aims to capture it attempts to investigate and make sense of the phenomenological essence. So the important thing here is to understand that here we are after the essence. So when I'm talking about employee engagement, I'm trying to understand engagement from the perspective of an employee who's actually working within the context of a virtual organization. So remember, I was talking about context. So the context is important in IPA, okay? In what context are you there? It attempts to investigate and make sense of the phenomenological essence. So the essence of something is being researched, okay? Okay, so I'm going to skip through that, attempt to capture knowing through telling. Okay, I'm just going to go through this method of learning about another person. But okay, so here's an important one, an attempt to capture experience in process as lived through descriptive analysis. So if you're doing a descriptive phenomenology, you're looking at their descriptive accounts of something. And you see the themes that are emerging, but you don't make your own interpretative spin on those themes. You allow the themes to emerge and report the themes as they see. A method of knowing through doing, telling, sharing, a method of learning about another person by listening to their descriptions free of our perceptions. We talked about bracketing in the last segment. It's important to bracket your own notions, biases, prejudices, or whatever in order for data to emerge, because otherwise you're going to steer the conversation in the direction of your own thoughts. We work with in-depth semi-structured interviews. Researcher assumes an active role and voice, okay? So don't test hypothesis. There is no such thing as a hypothesis in phenomenology. Remember one thing, very important. There is no such thing as hypothesis, okay? You have a research question, you base it on that, but you don't form a hypothesis like you would. Now, in grounded theory, you can have an hypothesis, but not in phenomenology. In phenomenology, you simply have a research question. So don't use a theoretical model to determine the research question. So when you're formulating a research question, you're not looking at theories. It's a very pre-theoretical, pre-reflective part. And just because we don't have that kind of time here, I cannot get into that in more depth. But just remember, you're not putting theoretical spins. Now, am I saying that theory doesn't exist in qualitative research? No, there is a presence of theory. You're going to use theory when you go to the end of your study and you're making sense of what was done and making meaning with the literature review. Then you're making the connections between what you collected in the literature. And that's how you write your report. And that's when theories come in. But you don't start when you're experiencing or when you're interviewing people, you don't think, okay, based on Darwin's theory, what do you think? right? That's not the idea, because you're not putting a theoretical spin. You're asking them to just reflect on the phenomena. The primacy of the life world. I talked about the life world inhabited by LGBTQ community, other folks that belong to the same life world. Means that approach to understanding is pre-theoretical and pre-reflective. Try as come as close or as close as you can to understanding the experiences being lived. There is no claim that phenomenological results are predictive or replicable. Unlike quantitative, where you might say that the results of the study can be replicated because you've come out with a grand theory that you can apply to other situations and problems too, that you would have almost the same results. It cannot be further from the truth when you're doing qualitative research, because in qualitative research, there's no such thing as replicability. There's reliability, there is something scientific, but there is two same studies on the same phenomena with the same participants may have different results. That's the beauty and the complexity and the hairy nature of qualitative research. Okay, but sometimes people miss that. Bracketing, I talked about. Epoch, I talked about with you. Bracket your own assumptions to get to that. Verstehen, I talked about hermeneutics, triple hermeneutics, double hermeneutic. Verstehen is a rejection of positivist science. So you're rejecting positivist science when you're looking at Verstehen. So it's a phenomena that occurs in qualitative. You go for qualitatives because you feel that your research problem, research phenomena cannot be answered using a quantitative approach. Okay. Paradoxically bilateral, I talked to you about that. You're co-creating the knowledge, co-creating the information. Phenomenological reduction is an attempt to observe the viewpoint. So suspend the observer's viewpoint in order to get to the essence, the core, or the, as people who are attending from India would understand, also the itra, we call that the itra, or the essence, ITR, which is the rose itra, or the essence of something. You're trying to get to the essence, the core of something. So in order to get to the essence of something, you have to, peel off the onion skin, right? Layer by layer, layer by layer, layer by layer to get to the onion core. So likewise, so hearing another person's reality and focusing on the central, dominant, or recurring themes which represent the essential qualities or meanings of that person's experience. Now, folks, we have about 10 minutes before the end time, and I still have a lot to cover here, okay? Especially we have not even gotten into this thing. So what I wanted to do was just jump from this and get into IPA so I can show you what IPA means and how it is enacted. And then maybe we can go back tomorrow and revisit this same slide and get into the grounded theory part of it, because otherwise we are going in the flow of interpretive phenomenological analysis. And I don't want to leave IPA out of that because IPA is a really distinct approach. Okay, so I'm going to do that right now. And I'm actually going to go into IPA right now. All right, so again, I'm not jumping ship from that. I just want to make sure that I give you the approach, because this is a distinct turnkey approach on how to go about something, how to utilize this approach to study phenomena. All right, so use of IPA in qualitative data analysis. A lot of times people ask me, how do we, okay, so Dr. Bell, we've got all this data, and how do we now analyze this data? How do we make sense of this data? There's so much here. What is the process that we follow? What is the strategy? What is it? Do you have a procedure to follow? Or can we just look at this data and feed it to NVivo and let NVivo do that? Well, I have never used NVivo or any software, because most of my qualitative studies are with a small corpus, about 10 or 15 participants. So I don't think a computer can do what I can do, because a computer is only going to do what I put into the computer. Now, it's okay if it's a large data sets, You can use NVivo, because NVivo is going to come up with key terms, keywords, key phrases. Then you can expound on that. And when I was doing my study, my doctorate years ago, I said to my chair, and I said, Dr. Silverman, I'd like to use software. He said, are you lazy? I said, why? He said, because if you're lazy and you don't want to go through your transcripts and you simply want the computer to do it, why didn't you allow the computer to do your entire research, the entire PhD? Why did you do the PhD? So this is your time. It's a painstaking process. I would do it, he said, manually. Because what you're going to get manually, no computer is going to change. Now, am I saying that NVivo is not great? NVivo is a great tool when your data set is very large and you don't have the time to go through like 50 interviews or 40 interviews, and you don't have the capacity to eyeball each and every transcript and make sense of the words, etc. But I'll show you a process here that you can use. It's a 6-step process that I created that you can use very effectively to analyze data. So I'm going to go through that now. So interpretive phenomenological analysis, it is an approach. It is not a methodology per se. So it's an approach to analyzing data, okay? It's not a methodology. It was developed by Jonathan Smith. It's an in-depth approach to analyzing data in streams of consciousness and phenomenology. So I'm going to go through fast. Focus of this presentation, I'm going to skip through that. Sample research question. So it's kind of like the same format that I used previously. So here I'm asking a sample research, what does engagement mean to employees, right? So I'm asking about engagement as an indirect experience, not as a direct lived experience. So here, phenomenology, which we use descriptive phenomenology, transcendental phenomenology, because we are understanding the indirect experience of engagement. So anybody can tell me about employee engagement without even being engaged as an employee. Oh, I know what engagement might mean. That's not what I'm looking for if I'm doing a different research question. So if I go into a different research question, what is it like for employees to experience engagement in a virtual team? Now I'm recruiting participants who are working virtually. Now, what does engagement mean to you? I'm asking them. No, now I'm asking them the direct lived experience. Okay, so this is pretty much like what I shared with you previously. Focus of IP is the ontological nature of being. It is about meaning making and sense making. So when we ask ontological nature of being, what does that mean? What is it like to be gay? Or how does one make sense of chronic lower back pain? Or perhaps what is it like for unwed mothers to raise children in a single parent household? So we see the kind of novel questions IP asks. IP is about meaning making and sense making, analyzes thick emotional data. It does not attempt to hypothesize, validate, refute, define, taxonomize, or theorize. Very, very important. We're not looking for hypotheses. We're not looking to validate somebody's experience. We're not looking to refute someone's experience. We're not asking them define what abuse means to you. I'm asking you, what does abuse mean to you as an experience, not as a definition? Taxonomize. I don't asking you, give me 10 reasons why you felt abused. No, that's not my question. Or to theorize. What theoretical constructs do you think of when you experience abuse? I'm staying away from theory right now, okay? Why pursue IPA? Okay, we have already gone through that. Theoretical underpinnings of IPA. There are 3 theoretical pillars of IPA. The number 1 pillar of IPA, most important, is phenomenology, okay? It's understanding the essence of a phenomena from the first person point of view. It is about intentionality, i.e., it is directed towards something. So intentionality means it's directed towards something, it's not something vague. It is you are directing the mind of the participant to a particular phenomenon. Hermeneutics is the second pillar. Interpretation of text, be it written, verbal, and non-verbal. So how a person responds, their body language, what they say, the as, all of that become really important because you're doing a textual analysis. You're doing an analysis on conceptual, linguistic, and textual basis. So 3 layers of analyses. Ideography, understanding an individual's retrospective account. You're asking them not to, I don't ask somebody to tell me, how are you feeling right now in this seminar? That's not my question. My question was, when you attended my last seminar a year ago or 5 months ago or 4 months ago, what was it like to have experienced that seminar? Because I'm taking you back into a retrospective account. So in phenomenology at IPA, you never ask them, how are you feeling right in this moment? Because there is no such thing as this moment. The moment somebody starts to talk about this moment, that moment has already slipped into the past. Has it not? Because you're reflecting on that moment, because how can you be at the exact moment, tell me what's going on? You're going to start thinking about that moment, which has already slipped into the past. You're deeply reflecting on that moment. So keep that in mind. IPA different from other methods. Okay, I'm not going to go into that. IPA uses small corpuses. So typically when you're doing an IPA study, you do about 15 maximum. 10 to 15 would be the optimal number of participants that you would have, because you go deep, you don't go wide. You go very deep into their accounts. And that's what makes it beautiful. It's on the co-creation and understanding. The researcher assumes a hands-on, not hands-off. If you were doing a quantitative study, you would be hands-off. This is hands-on. Paradoxically, bilateral relationship. You're being impacted and you're impacting the study. Interpretation and sense-making have already begun in the data collection phase. Inductive approach is an inductive, you'll hear the words inductive and deductive. Most quantitative research is deductive. It starts with grand theories and then applies to specific cases or problems. Inductive is you start with specific cases. Every individual interviews a specific case. You take those cases into account, and then you make some general observations, not as in general theories or general hypotheses, just some general observations when collected on the data. I interviewed 5 people or 10 people, and this is what seemed to have emerged as the predominant themes. We call them the superordinate themes. Okay. So IP and bracketing, I talked about the bracketing, why it's important to bracket your assumptions, biases, thoughts in order to collect good quality data. Now, here is a 6-step approach that I follow. And again, this is being recorded, so I'm going to share this recording with you. And if some of you are wanting this PowerPoint, I would be happy to share my PowerPoint with you with a caveat. This is not to be shared with others. It's only for your consumption. Or better still, I can share this thematic with you, stage 1 to 6. Because sometimes I've found that people in their overzealousness will go ahead and give it to the whole world. Before I know it, people are saying, oh, I saw your PowerPoint somewhere else. That's okay. I'm just kidding. I don't consider myself to be the sole owner of this. Yes, I created and developed this, but it is for people to use. It's not me to just keep next to my vest. So again, I'm happy to share whatever you see here. I'm happy to share PowerPoints, whatever with you individually. I'm not going to do it collectively. So if you write to me individually and say, this was a really interesting PowerPoint, can we discuss this? Can we talk about this? I'd be very happy to do that. Phenomenology is the writing up phase. It's very, very important that you understand that. I've gone really quick just to be mindful of the time. Now, what I wanted to do, Pranati, I want you to wake up. Are you
Already
awake?
awake. Of course.
Are you awake? Or I thought you're already asleep. My moderator is asleep. What am I going to do? Okay.
No, no, no.
No,
You
just
can't
kidding.
catch me asleep.
Hey, wait till I get you. Okay, so Pranati, having done this, I think we want to go spend at least, I know we will go slightly over the time boundary, because for me it's exactly 11 o'clock, which is 9:30 for you guys. So if people are okay, we can spend another 10 minutes on a Q&A and just have people talk
Mhm.
rather than go into the chat. So collect the
Right.
chat messages
Absolutely.
before this vanishes. Okay, because
It's
once
done.
I close the data, it's already done. Good for you.
Already done.
Okay,
In
wonderful,
in two
wonderful.
formats.
Okay, excellent. Oh my goodness, you impressed me. So let's open it up for a quick sort of a Q&A where people can express and talk, right? Because they've been listening for 2 hours. So you can raise your hand if everybody knows where the raise hand icon is. There's a little hand. Okay, Giridhra. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, sir. Actually, I'm a core infectious disease epidemiologist, and I've been taking this training for health policy and systems research for the last 7, 8 months.
Okay.
So during that training, we've been told about context and positionality,
Yeah.
all the different terminologies. Like what you said, the positivist, interpretivist, and all those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
One very thing that we were actually trying to understand, and we still fail to understand, is HPSR has a framework. I mean, we know that, okay, these are the different blocks that you need to cover. And then
Yes.
using that framework, we do a research and then we try to make a process out of it. But
Correct.
in all this kind of, theory and the kind of slides that you have gone through, can we, try to make some kind of a framework? Is it advisable? I mean, when we present results, saying that, this is how things are in my context, and this is the kind of framework that I have identified after analyzing all the themes, so that such kind of frameworks can then be
Uh,
replicated. The reason why I'm asking is because replication is a challenge in qualitative research.
yes,
So
yes, 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 yes.
that was the whole point behind my question.
Okay, so that's an excellent question. So what you're really saying is you came up with the summary, you came up with the findings and all that. How do you present the findings in sort of like, I cautiously see this in a quantitative way so that people can see that and read a diagram and read something, because people are so used to seeing pictures. And there are no
Correct.
pictures because all data, right? Yeah, there are some
Yeah.
tables and demographics and whatnot and qualitative. So I think that's an excellent idea. So what you can do is you can use a mind mapping software, right?
Right.
You can create a mind map and you could really come out with a brilliant schematic. I
Okay.
think that's a wonderful idea. Did everybody hear that? So it's a wonderful idea to present your findings in the sort of a schematic. Unfortunately, one of my students is not here. I probably forgot to invite her. She's in Pakistan and did it at the Islamic University there, and she did a research on transgender entrepreneurial motivation. Okay, and
Right.
she presented her findings and outcomes in a very schematic way, which was beautiful. It was brilliantly done. So it's not that you're never going to use charts, figures, numbers. Okay, you are going
Yeah,
to
I
use
get
it,
it.
but not for the purpose of the study, but to present your findings. Excellent
Yeah.
point, Giridhara.
I had one last question.
Okay.
I'll keep it very short. Now, in a quantitative research, a sample size, you have a set questions, number of questions or something to elicit, and you will finish it off.
Yes.
But in a qualitative research, you say that you're going to interview, say, PhD medical officers or some bureaucrats or ministers and so on and so forth. Now, when do you know that you have actually elicited enough information to because I keep hearing this information that, okay, it gets repeated, then you need to stop.
Okay.
What
So
if
what
my
you're talking,
sampling frame itself was biased?
okay, what you're talking about is a construct called saturation.
Correct.
When do we reach a point of saturation? Let me
Yes.
tell you
And
one thing.
also,
In IP, no,
no,
just
and
give me,
also,
just
sir,
pause.
sorry
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
interrupt.
Huh.
Yeah, I was sorry to interrupt. The saturation can also be because I chose a very limited sampling frame. So was I wrong when I chose that sampling frame? Was it a bias initially? So that was the whole.
Okay.
Yeah,
What you're using, saturation is typically used in the realm of quantitative studies.
I see. Okay.
Or, and I stand corrected, or you use saturation when you're doing grounded theory. Because what is the goal in grounded theory? In grounded theory, the goal is to construct a new theory where one did not exist. So you're going to be the author of that brand new theory, number one, or refining an existing theory. So saturation means that you should continue to collect data till any further data that you collect does not add anything of value. It has a diminishing marginal utility. You heard the expression, I only remember one thing in economics, diminishing marginal utility. Means if I have only 5 lakhs rupees, right? And I have to spend 5,000 on some, if I only have 5 lakh rupees, believe me, I only have 5 lakh. Okay. So if I have to spend 5,000 rupees, I'm talking rupees. If I have to spend 5,000 rupees, I'll have to think 20 times. Because 5 lakhs as a percent of 5,000 rupees as a percentage of 5 lakhs is pretty high.
True.
Whereas what if I had 5 crores? Right? So for a person who has 5 crores, not me, somebody else, a person who has 5 crores, for them, that 5,000 may not be that big of a percentage. Or let's put it another way. So the diminishing marginal utility means that if you are amassing money, right? If you only had 2 lakhs and you started making more money, every 5,000 means a lot more to you than if you had 50 lakhs or 5 crores. Then 5,000 additional has a diminishing marginal utility. It doesn't give you that much more happiness, right? Unless somebody has a windfall and get another 5 crores, they have 5 plus 5, 10 crores, right? Okay. So anyway, I don't want to waste too much time on this, but I wanted to give you so saturation is not something that we apply to phenomenology, because the idea of phenomenology is to collect good qualitative data and interpret that data, make sense of that. So let's go to the next question.
Yes, sir.
So anybody else who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll be happy to answer that question for you. Pranati, do you see any hands up?
I don't see any hands up, but I see Dr. Kimberly has unmuted themselves. Dr. Kimberly, would you want to ask a question? Dr. Venkatesh, else you could go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to reiterate about my question that I posted on the text.
Okay.
Right now, I have embarked upon a performance assessment of a program, national program at the district level.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm trying to uncover the challenges experienced by the healthcare providers as well as the patients.
Okay.
In terms of that strategy, it's called as ACSM, advocacy, social mobilization, and communication.
Mm-hmm.
And that is rolled out as a part of the strategy of the program.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of what challenges that the healthcare providers face in rolling it out and trying to make outreach to the people,
mm-hmm.
as well as what patient feels the challenges in trying to access this program in terms of enrolling sooner once when they get to know about it, after they come across this this strategy rolled out by the program. So in this light, how can I conceive the research question is the question.
Okay, so I don't have an easy, quick answer for you because it's a very complex question. Okay, but from listening to what you're telling me, 2 thoughts are jumping in my mind. One, either you do a grounded theory approach, okay? Either you do a grounded theory approach, okay, where we can understand challenging factors, etc. Or you do a qualitative study with a mix of content and do content analysis and thematic analysis. What do I mean by that? So you're interviewing participants, right, to understand their challenges, etc., right? So you're understanding what themes are emerging from that. And then all the data that they're providing to you that is already part of your mix, the data that means you may have conducted surveys, they must have written reports. That data can be analyzed through a content analysis process. So there the content analysis and thematic analysis talk with each other. Remember, content analysis is used often in quantitative studies. Okay, because there's a lot of data
Okay.
that is secondary data. It's not because what your data that you collect through interviews is primary data. It's data that you receive through interviews. Secondary data also exists. So if you want to do a robust study, and I can discuss this with you if you email me, we can take this offline and we can talk about this more in depth. It could create a study design that you can actually have a mix, a hybrid of thematic analysis and content analysis, or just do a grounded theory approach, where you realize you're trying to understand factors, challenges that are occurring for people. Okay, but thank you. That's an excellent question.
Fine. Thanks a lot for giving me a great insight in this regard.
Oh,
about
thank you
both
so much.
content as well as thematic analysis.
Yeah, content and thematic analysis. And I have a whole presentation on content analysis, but there won't be enough time, definitely not tomorrow, to go into that, because tomorrow I have to do research, how to develop a research proposal, etc. Also, and also do action research. So anybody
Sure.
else? Thank you so much for your question, by the way. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we shall have an off after the event. We'll
Yes, you know my email by now. I've sent you the millions of emails. So you know my email address by now. Reach out to me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So anybody else, Pranati?
There are questions in the chat box that I have noted. Would anybody like to unmute themselves?
Yeah.
Last chance to do that for today.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can move on to above time. Exactly.
Yeah. Nobody's raised their hand?
No, nobody as of now.
Okay. Okay. So I'm assuming that.
Oh, yes, we see one hand up.
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Dr. Archana Mandal. Why
Okay,
don't you
go
go
ahead?
ahead?
Go ahead, Dr. Archana Mandal, please.
So good evening, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I'm doing one project on the healthcare problems of a village. So while going through the transcript, sir, this is the first time I'm trying to do. So I'm facing a problem of how to generate, like, what is a theme exactly? It's a very basic question.
Yes. Yes.
Through the transcript, how do we get to that, sir?
Yes, so I was just talking about my 6-step approach. Okay.
Yeah.
What I would also request you to do is, because this is a specific situation to you, so if you can email me, I'd be very happy to assist you with that.
Sure.
And send you the schematic and show you some ways on how you can go about that. I'm very happy to help you out. But it is beyond the scope of this discussion to be able to take it so much because of the time element. But thanks for your question. Anybody else?
Sure.
Pranati, anybody else out there that wants to talk?
Yes, we have Viswanath who would not like to ask something now.
Yes, go
Why
ahead.
Why don't
Vishwanath.
you go ahead?
Hello, sir. Could you hear me? Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
My doubt is, should we use this qualitative research methods in a mixed method design to explain the factors which we collect from the quantitative study? So should the quantitative study be followed by the qualitative component?
Wonderful. So tomorrow I'm going to be doing a segment. I want to do so much with you guys, but there's not going to be enough time. So if I go through like a lightning express, please understand that it's not my intent. This is not how I really do it. If I were sitting with you face to face for 2 days, 3 days, 8-hour sessions per day, we would go through all that, and yet there would be things uncovered. But tomorrow I'm going to be touching on mixed methods research, okay? And we can discuss it in that context. Is that okay that I discuss with you tomorrow on this?
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Dr. Behel, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so usually we have...
Who is this? Who is this?
This is Anil Bilimale.
Anil, how are you? Go ahead.
Yeah. So usually we have this habit of including some of the open-ended questions in a quantitative study. That's actually qualitative data that get come into picture.
Yes.
But do we have to come up with all this background theoretical approach in mind when we are doing that? or otherwise will it make any sense to have just
Okay.
open-ended? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's a really good question, because sometimes what happens is when people are doing a study, when they're designing a questionnaire that they send to 100 respondents, they will have a short answer, like provide a short answer to me. There are pros and cons of doing that. The pros are that people that do that usually are the ones that going to be able to glean that data and use it to piggyback on a qualitative piece. So they are trying to do a mixed method study. Okay, because otherwise they would be pointless to have thoughts, feelings, ideas on something if you cannot translate that into numeric data. So Dr. Bilimal, so I don't know if that answers your question, but I've often found that people will include those to either just get a sense of just something. They're flirting with the idea of qualitative, but they're not quite sure if they want to do qualitative. They feel that ek do question to dal dete hain, right? Let's put 2 or 3 questions there to get a sense of what those people are feeling. There's nothing wrong with that. I just feel that that data cannot be effectively used if you're not going to be adding a qualitative piece to it. Otherwise, it just becomes redundant. That data is useless.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah. No, because mixed methods is totally, the approach itself is different. The methodology itself
Yeah,
is different. It's just a question
exactly.
inside a quantitative. Yeah.
Yeah, in the quantitative, you're just putting that. First of all, if somebody was sending me that questionnaire, I would ask the question: are you doing quantitative analysis or qualitative analysis? Because your questions are, if it's just one question, like if the question asks, what is your, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I would certainly ask that person, the gentleman, the question: what is it trying to do? Okay. Because if you're asking 2 or 3 questions, which are qualitative questions or qualitative in nature, then you're defeating the whole purpose of this questioning.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anybody else, real quick?
No hands up as of now.
Okay. All right. So I think that people don't have questions, but if you've captured in the chat, all right, then what we will do is we will definitely try to address some of those questions tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then I'll do it offline in an email, top of email communication with everybody. Oh, Sid has raised a hand. Siddharth. Go ahead, Siddharth. Unmute yourself, please.
No, I just wanted to say, Dr. Bahel, this was fantastic and extremely useful. Looking forward to the next session tomorrow. Thank you very much for this.
Wonderful. Siddharth is one of my students also. I was just thinking, where is Siddharth hiding? Is
very much here? Very much,
okay,
sir. Thank
wonderful. You. Keep on learning, my friend. Okay, so with that, Pranati, can we just wind it up today, because it's already over the time boundary?
Absolutely. Whatever questions we have, we can club it. We have email IDs ready, so we can call it a night or
okay, so you
afternoon.
have the email IDs of those people there?
Yes, everything is sorted.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for keeping an eye on that. I really appreciate it. Okay, folks,
No
it was a long session. I'm sorry it went over. The material is just far too much. I've not even covered the tip of the spear, as they say, okay, or the tip of the iceberg. There's so much material to cover, and I wish that I had more time, but we just have to be mindful for people. It's early for me here. It's only 11:15 for me. For you, it's nighttime there. And I disrupt your dinner and all that. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your contributions and participation. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, 7:30 p.m. IST. Okay? Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dr. Bahel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Dr. Bahel.